Before we dive into today's story, I want you to think about a time you were wronged. A time someone tried to dim your light to make their own shine brighter. Hold that feeling. Because the story you're about to hear is for anyone who has ever been underestimated, sabotaged, or pushed to their breaking point. It's a story that proves that the most satisfying justice is the kind you serve yourself. If you believe in the power of patience and the inevitability of karma, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because you won't want to miss a single moment of this. And when we're done, I want to hear your story in the comments below. For 5 years, my professional life was a slow, methodical demolition. My name is Winter, and in the bustling corporate landscape of St. Louis, I was a ghostwriter of success, someone else's success. That someone was my cousin, Alex. We'd started at the financial tech firm, Innovest, at the same time. Alex, with a natural, easy charm that captivated boardrooms, and me, with a quiet diligence and a mind for systems. We were family, so I trusted him. That was my first mistake. The abuse was systematic, a masterpiece of slow-burn sabotage. It began with small things. An idea I'd float in a private brainstorming session would be presented by Alex in the next team meeting, polished and claimed as his own. Winter and I were just spitballing, he'd say with a magnanimous smile, and I landed on this. The credit was his, I was a footnote. Then came the projects. I was the architect of the Helios Initiative, a predictive analytics model that became the cornerstone of our department. I worked 80-hour weeks, fueled by coffee and a desperate need to prove my worth. Alex was the project lead. He presented my work, my data, my conclusions. He got the promotion. I got a pat on the back and was told, "You're a great support, Winter. Alex couldn't do it without you." He cultivated an image of me as competent but fragile. "Winter is brilliant, but a bit high-strung," he'd confide in our director. "Needs a lot of managing to stay on track." He'd assign me impossible deadlines and then swoop in at the last minute to save the day, reinforcing the narrative that I was unreliable. Over 5 years, the whispers became fact. My reputation was a ruin, and Alex had built his career on its rubble. I endured it with a technique I later learned was called the gray rock method. I became utterly uninteresting. When Alex provoked me, I'd give one-word answers. When he stole my ideas, I'd offer a flat, "Good thought, Alex." I documented everything, every email, every stolen credit, every late-night text demanding I fix a problem he'd created. My patience was a shield, but beneath it, a different kind of skill was being honed. A skill Alex knew nothing about. Before Innovest, I didn't work in finance. I worked for a discreet government contractor. My job title was threat analyst, but in reality, I was a digital ghost. I specialized in corporate espionage, the legal kind. I was hired to test security, to find vulnerabilities, to think like a thief and a saboteur to protect our clients from them. I could trace digital footprints, uncover shell corporations, and find secrets buried in the deep web. It was a skill set worth a fortune, and I had walked away from it for a normal life. When Alex's abuse began, my old instincts kicked in. I started a file, encrypted and stored on a private server, codenamed Project Takedown. It wasn't just a diary of grievances, it was a meticulously compiled case file. I logged every instance of his sabotage, cross-referencing them with company emails and project timelines. The Helios Initiative was my masterpiece, and Alex had stolen it outright. But he didn't understand the code, not really. Buried deep within the architecture, I had embedded a digital watermark, a kill switch disguised as a redundant data validation loop. It was my signature, invisible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. I began to dig into Alex. Not just at work, but his whole life. It was shockingly easy. He was sloppy. He used the same weak passwords for everything. I found his hidden debts, his inflated expense reports, the way he'd leveraged his position to secure kickbacks from vendors. He was a house of cards, and I had the schematics. The crown jewel of my research was his theft of my side project, a proprietary trading algorithm I'd been developing on my own time. I called it Seraph. It was revolutionary, capable of analyzing market sentiment from social media and news patterns. I valued its potential at $2,500,000. And Alex had found it on my personal drive, copied it, and was shopping it around to Innovest's competitors, passing it off as his own escape plan. He was trying to sell my secret power. He didn't know that in doing so, he had just handed me the gun and loaded it for him. The breaking point came on a crisp October evening in 2025. Innovest was celebrating its 10th anniversary with a gala at the Coronado, a historic St. Louis landmark with a ballroom that dripped old-world glamour. It was the kind of place where reputations were made or shattered under the light of crystal chandeliers. Alex was the man of the hour. He was being awarded the Innovator of the Decade award for his visionary leadership on the Helios Initiative. My initiative. He stood on stage, basking in the applause of 72 of our most influential colleagues, clients, and executives. He looked out at the crowd, his eyes scanning until they landed on me. A smirk played on his lips. "I have to thank my team," he began, his voice smooth as bourbon. "And especially my cousin, Winter. A lot of people don't know this, but Winter needs a little extra guidance. A firm hand. Without my mentorship, that brilliant but chaotic mind would never have produced anything of value. It's a tough job, turning raw talent into actual results, but as a leader, that's what you do. You take the credit, because you earned it by managing the unmanageable." The room filled with a mixture of polite chuckles and pitying looks in my direction. It was the cruelest thing he could have said. He didn't just steal my work, he was framing it as an act of charity. He had painted me as a charity case he had heroically saved. The humiliation was a physical force, hot and suffocating. That was it. The line had been crossed. For 5 years, I had been a patient victim. Then I became a survivor, quietly documenting and planning. In that moment, under the golden glow of the Coronado's ballroom, I became a victor in waiting. The psychological satisfaction of revenge, as I'd read in a study on the understanding hypothesis, isn't just about payback, it's about the offender understanding why they are being punished. Alex would understand. I would make sure of it. The next 3 months were a blur of cold, focused rage. I took a week of personal leave, telling HR I was on the verge of burnout, a story Alex's narrative had made all too believable. I didn't rest. I worked. First, the legal preparations. I consulted with a discreet law firm specializing in intellectual property and defamation. I showed them a fraction of my evidence, the code for Seraph, the digital watermark in Helios, and a handful of emails where Alex explicitly took credit for my work. They were salivating. We drew up a civil lawsuit, citing damages for intellectual property theft and reputational harm. We modeled the defamation claim on cases like Gibson versus Overnight Transportation Company, aiming for a significant punitive award. Next, the financial preparations. I liquidated some assets and prepared to live without an income for at least a year. My hidden value wasn't just the algorithm, it was the nest egg I'd built from my previous career. I was ready. Then came the evidence compilation. Project Takedown was my Bible. It contained recordings, dozens of audio files from meetings, captured via a pen recorder, where my ideas were dismissed by Alex, only to be presented by him later. Digital forensics, a complete trace of Alex copying the Seraph algorithm from my drive, with IP addresses, timestamps, and MAC addresses. I also had the emails he'd sent to competitors, complete with their replies. Financial records, a detailed breakdown of his expense report fraud and vendor kickbacks, linking back to shell accounts he'd set up. He'd bragged about a big deal he'd closed with a company in Florida, even mentioning their celebratory dinner at the Cowford Chop House in Jacksonville. A quick check showed the expense report for that trip was entirely fabricated. Witness corroboration, I reached out to 3 ex-employees who had been forced out by Alex's toxic management. They were more than willing to provide written testimony. The cost of workplace bullying is high. Studies show a single bully can cost a company over $100,000 a year in turnover and lost productivity. Alex had cost Innovest triple that. The final piece was the timing. The company's annual shareholder meeting was in January. It was a live-streamed event, a perfect stage. My plan was not just to destroy Alex, but to do it in a way that was public, undeniable, and legally bulletproof. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my name. It was my point of no return. The day of the shareholder meeting was cold and gray, a perfect mirror of the mood inside Innovest's main auditorium. The event was being live-streamed to thousands of investors. Alex, now a vice president, was scheduled to give the keynote address on the future of fintech, a presentation built entirely on my stolen Seraph algorithm. 5 minutes before he was due on stage, my plan went into motion. Step 1, the legal strike. At exactly 9:55 a.m., my lawyers filed the civil lawsuit. Simultaneously, a server walked into the green room and handed a stunned Alex the papers. He was being sued for $2.5 million. Step 2, the digital takedown. At 9:58 a.m., I activated the kill switch inside the Helios initiative. Across the company, every terminal accessing the Helios dashboard suddenly froze. The screens went black, then displayed a single line of text. Helios Predictive Model. Architecture by Winter, redacted. Property of Innovest. Unauthorized duplication or representation is a breach of contract. System integrity compromised. Awaiting admin reset. Step 3, the information cascade. At 10 a.m., as Alex was being hustled towards the stage, a company-wide email went out from a secure, anonymous address. The subject, an open letter on innovation and integrity at Innovest. The email was a masterclass in corporate takedown. It laid out, with cold, hard evidence, Alex's 5-year campaign of theft and sabotage. It included a link to a password-protected site containing the audio recordings, screenshots of his emails attempting to sell the Seraph algorithm, a summary of the fraudulent expense reports, totaling over $80,000, the sworn affidavits from the 3 former employees. The email ended with a simple, devastating line: the greatest asset a company has is its people. What happens when you allow one person to systematically destroy them? Alex walked onto the stage, his face pale. He looked at the teleprompter, but his words were gone. Instead, it just read, "Tell them about Seraph, Alex." He froze. The auditorium, filled with 72 of the company's most important figures, was a sea of faces staring at their phones. A low murmur grew into a roar. People were reading the email. They were listening to the recordings. They were looking from their phones to the man on stage, the innovator of the decade, and seeing a fraud. The live stream was still running. The world was watching. The downfall was immediate and absolute. Alex stood on stage, paralyzed, as the CEO and 2 board members walked up and escorted him away. The live stream was abruptly cut, but not before millions had witnessed the silent implosion. The social media explosion was instantaneous. The story went viral, trending on Twitter with the hashtag #InnovestImplosion. My story became a rallying cry, a quit talk moment for the corporate world, gaining over 25 million views. People shared their own stories of toxic bosses. I saw a post on a Reddit forum, started by a user named relevant_grape_4106, that was filled with thousands of similar experiences. I wasn't alone. The public reaction was a textbook case of schadenfreude, the pleasure derived from seeing a high-status, envied person suffer a downfall they deserve. Commentators noted that the satisfaction came from the sheer justice of it, the punishment fit the crime perfectly. Legally, Alex was finished. Faced with irrefutable evidence of corporate espionage, which costs the U.S. economy hundreds of billions annually, Innovest's board had no choice. They fired him for cause, voiding his contract and stock options. They also initiated their own criminal complaint for trade secret theft and fraud. Financially, he was devastated. The lawsuit wiped out his savings. The criminal charges ensured he would never work in the industry again. His family, who had once praised his ambition, now saw him as a disgrace and cut him off completely. He lost his house, his car, and his reputation. 6 months later, I sat in a new office with a view of Gateway Arch. Innovest, desperate to salvage its reputation, had settled with me out of court. The terms were generous, a multi-million-dollar payout for the Serif algorithm, which they were now licensing from me, a public apology, and the creation of a new role for me, Chief Innovation Officer. My first act was to rehire the 3 talented people Alex had forced out. My transformation was complete. I was no longer a victim or a survivor. I was a victor. I saw Alex one last time. He'd called me, begging for a meeting. He looked like a ghost, thin and haunted. We met at a quiet cafe far from the city center. Winter, He started, his voice cracking. I'm sorry. I don't know why. Yes, you do, Alex, I said, my voice calm and steady. I wasn't angry anymore. I felt a profound, liberating indifference. You did it because you could. Because you thought I was weak. You thought I would just take it. He pleaded, asking if I could drop the civil suit, if I could talk to the DA. He said his life was over. I took a sip of my coffee. My life is just beginning, I replied. I stood up to leave. No one has the right to abuse you, Alex. Justice may be delayed, but it's inevitable. Those were my final words to him. I walked out into the St. Louis sunshine, feeling the warmth on my face. I was free. My story wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming my power, my name, and my future. It was a message to every person sitting in a cubicle, feeling invisible and undervalued. Document everything, trust your strength, and know that the most powerful revenge is building a life so successful, your abusers become nothing more than a footnote in your story.